Sorry, apologies. We now move to the keynote address, which will be delivered by Mr. Ajoy Chatterjee. He has served in the DG Shipping for more than 25 years since 1983, including over 6 years as a chief surveyor cum additional DG Shipping. He has been the head of statutory inspections, surveys, audits, and certification of merchant ships, and also the ex officio chief examiner for training standards, examination, and certification of marine engineers in the merchant navy. Since 2009, he served as an expert consultant and the lead IMSAS auditor at the International Maritime Organization. And after retirement in January 2010, he was a principal and the head of the Great Eastern Institute of Maritime Studies in Lonavala for over 9 years. And presently, he is the academic director of marine engineering of the ADU Academy, India. May I request Mr. Chatterjee to deliver his address?
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I thank Admiral Nadkarni for his kind words of introduction. And we are missing the president, but Mr. Ajay Chitnis has done a good job of introducing us, giving his address. Virtual podium, I would like to address Admiral Rao, Admiral Subedar, Admiral Krishnan, old friend, distinguished speakers, and a gentleman from Navy, the Merchant Navy, students and rest. As I said, my keynote address would actually address, try to bring out the essential points which will subsequently be explored, discussed, deliberated by the eminent speakers we have today. So I will just little bit on, I will share some slides which may make it lively, otherwise the keynote address can get very dry. So initially I would like to with some background, but I will be brief because Admiral Chitnis has already given us a good background, and I will talk more of current issues and what are the next steps. So here we go. Evolution of ships and their trade routes had a long history, almost as long as that of mankind. This development of merchant ships witnessed a gradual progression from relatively small and simple sail-powered ships in earlier centuries to larger and more complex fast clipper ships in the latter part of the century. In 1922, the steam engine was further developed, implemented into ships. They used paddle wheel propulsion with coal-fired steam boilers. The first propeller was invented in 1827 by Joseph Ressel. The SS Archimedes became probably the world's first steamship to be driven by a screw propeller in 1838. SS became the first propeller-driven steamship to cross the Atlantic. Towards the end of the 19th century, the steam turbine was adopted in 1897, and in 1906, the RMS developing as much as 6,000 shaft horsepower together with screw propulsion. The steam engine was totally changed propulsion since it developed the end of steam marine machinery in favor of the steam turbine. During the advent of steam turbine propulsion, Rudolf Diesel in 1892 developed a patent that had the first economically viable, more efficient two-stroke combustion engine, reciprocating engine 1 year later.
Sir, if I may just interrupt, I think your audio is not very clear to some of the attendees, sir.
You hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Is it clear?
Yes.
In 1912, much larger ocean ship, the Zealandia, was launched. The performance of diesel engines was progressively improved. The comparison of thermal efficiency of these early engines in current operation, when thermal efficiency has risen to values approaching 55% for slow speed engines. of heavy fuel has first started during the Second World War for use in marine diesel engine and it has become the standard fuel for majority of seagoing ships today. There are advantages and disadvantages, obviously, of burning heavy fuel. So, recently, local and international legislation has begun to be formulated, and the focus is moving to more expensive, lighter marine fuels and the use of dual fuel engines. With these engines, different grades of fuel are burned depending upon the prevailing requirements within the emission zones. In recent years, increasing oil prices have prompted interest in alternative propulsion options, changes in fuels for merchant ships. Typical of these have been the burning of LNG in reciprocating engines, wind-assisted propulsion, ducted propellers, energy-saving appendages, and interest in nuclear power as well. Today, the steam turbine has been largely given way to the diesel engine. This transition happened relatively quickly and coincided with the breakthrough of turbocharging and heavy fuel burning in slow-speed diesel engines, which gave these engines both power and the fuel economy to become more efficient than steam turbine propulsion. Consequently, the steam turbines are normally only found today in nuclear-powered ships and submarines, as well as some LNG ships. Although in this latter case, they are also giving way to reciprocating machinery. In the merchant shipping sector, the general demise of steam plant has in turn led to a shortage of steam plant operators. Development with cruise technology have led to the use of diesel-electric propulsion arrangements. This is due to the efforts to achieve low noise and vibration signatures, similar to steam turbine ships, combined with enhanced operational efficiency that is achievable with this mode of propulsion by utilizing payoffs between propulsion and hotel loading.
Sir, just 1 sec, sir. I think because you're turning your head, probably that is why the audio is going up and down. So maybe if you can just face the screen, that may be better, sir. That may be better for the audio if you can manage that, sir.
Yeah. Can you hear now?
Like, we can hear you when you're facing the screen, but when you're turning your head to the side, that is the time I think the audio is
okay. I'll try to do it better this time. With technological development in marine propulsion has been an ongoing process, and it's now until now it can be defined in 3 main revolutions: from pre-industrial revolution, the 1800s until 1900s, late 1800s to 2000, and what do we have after 2000? Of course, this is something which is very futuristic. It was designed for North Atlantic, where very high wind speeds are expected and normally prevalent. It is believed that it can make a staggering 90% reduction in CO2 emissions. So what are the short-term options? Shipping is vital to world economy. It is a critical part of international import-export markets and supports the global distribution of goods. As for all industries, concerns about climate change require the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from shipping sector. This entails higher fuel price for lower sulfur fuels. The diesel engine is currently the most widespread of marine prime movers. It is a well understood technology and a reliable form of marine propulsion and auxiliary power generation, with engine manufacturers well established repair and spare parts networks around the world. In case of fuel emissions and carbon emissions or emission control and efficiency, you have to think of a life cycle. What are they? The life cycle refers to assessment of GHG emissions from the fuel production to ship or well to wake, from primary production to carriage of fuel in ship's tank, well to tank, and also known as upstream emissions, and from ship's fuel tank to exhaust, tank to propeller, or tank to wake, also known as downstream emissions. So what has IMO done? What ships must do? The mandatory requirements. IMO has agreed to include a new chapter in energy efficiency in MARPOL Annex 6 and adopted mandatory energy efficiency regulation for ships called Energy Efficiency Design Index and attain EEDI for new ships, including a Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan known as SEAM for all ships. In 2016, IMO adopted the mandatory IMO data collection system, DCS, for ships to collect and report fuel oil consumption data for ships over 500 gross tons. First calendar year data collection completed in 2019 and submitted to the respective administrations. In 2020, the IMO 2020, 0.5% sulfur limit entered into force, cutting total sulfur oxide emissions from shipping by over 75%. In 2021, June, IMO adopted a short-term measure to reduce carbon intensity of all ships by 40% by 2030, rather ambitious, however, compared to 2008. They do this by requiring all ships now to calculate the energy efficiency of existing ship index, known as EEXI, and to establish their annual operational carbon intensity indicator, CII, rating. In other words, ships get a rating of their energy efficiency, whether A, B, C, D, or E, where A is the best. A ship running on a low carbon fuel clearly gets a higher rating than one running on fossil fuels. Liquid natural gas can be used in reciprocating engines, and the system is known as a technology which classification society is a known technology for rules and fuel system already in existence. Service experience with dual fuel and converted diesel engines, although limited at present time, has been satisfactory, and currently LNG is considered cheaper than conventional fuels. LNG, while not free from harmful emissions, has benefits in terms of carbon dioxide, NOx, and SOx emissions, given that methane slip is avoided during combustion and fuel fuel processes. Why do we need transition to alternative fuels? What are the key barriers? What options look feasible today? And how do we get there? Does the maritime sector need to change? What are the key opportunities? Which options look feasible for the medium and long term? We have to remember that greenhouse gas emissions are not the only reason for change. There is air pollution on NOx, SOx, particulate matter, and CFC, ozone depleting substances. I hope this webinar will focus on GHG, but it is important to consider that all these when thinking about alternative energy fuels. The alternatives we have are, which are being very seriously considered, is LNG, of course, LPG, methanol, biofuels, batteries, hydrogen, ammonia. All these fuels or energy sources have a case for being an alternative option for shipping. Other options are ethanol, feedstock already arranged for road transport, e-diesels, though high cost, nuclear, of course, it has its own political challenges and limits its applicability. Biofuels are potential medium-term alternatives to conventional fuels for diesel engines. Dimethyl ether shows some potential as an alternative fuel. However, there are presently disadvantages which need resolution in terms of lubricity and corrosion, together with creation of sufficient production and supply networks. Fuel cells offer potential for ship propulsion with good experience gained in auxiliary power propulsion machinery. While hydrogen is the easiest fuel to use in fuel cell, this would require a worldwide infrastructure to develop for supply to ships. A conventional method of design, planning, and building operation of merchant ships would, however, need a complete overhaul in case you go for nuclear propulsion, particularly in case of PWR designs. Issues also need to be addressed in terms of international regulation, public perception, acceptability, financing the initial cost, training and retention of crew, setting up and maintenance of global infrastructure, support system, insurance, nuclear energy, emergency response plans for ports. Battery technology is developing rapidly, offering some potential for propulsion. However, full ship battery propulsion requires full technical development and is likely to be concerned for relatively small ships. Nevertheless, battery-based propulsion would be beneficial due to producing no CO2, NOx, SOx, volatile organic compounds, or particulate matter. They may also offer a potential hybrid solution in conjunction with other modules of propulsion. Hydrogen, compressed air, and liquid nitrogen are likely to be long-term propulsion consideration. While options are energy storage, media, hydrogen is a fuel which generates no CO2 or SOx emissions to the atmosphere and would use land-based sources of power for its issue. It would be a supply infrastructure and distribution networks to be viable in a marine context, but is ideal for use in fuel cells. Here we have LPG fuel shells which are already in place, and methanol ships. As you can see, the very little change is required between methanol ships and ammonia ships. the same ships can run on dual fuel, HFO included. And these are the diagrams, as you can see. There's a lot of safety issues, but very simply, but very, I would say, engineering aspect is very good in the sense of double wall pipes, single wall pipes, and complete inert atmosphere in case of wherever the gas is present. So where do we have ideally an existing ship? We have the mapping of ongoing zero emission pilot demonstration projects undertaken by Zero Coalition. And the result shows that ongoing pilot projects, there are, let's say, battery power, large ships, nearly 4 of them, biofuels, 5 of them, methanol, ethanol, 3 ships, ammonia, 9 ships, hydrogen, 6 ships. So there is a hectic progress in conducting pilot projects, and how do we get there? Ideally, an existing less efficient ship should be replaced with a new ship with superior environmental performance, satisfying the most stringent phase of EEDI requirement. However, it is not realistic to impose legal obligation on ship owners to replace the ships because fleet replacement will be decided based on each company's economic circumstances and business strategy. Instead, fuel changes, retrofitting, or installation of additional energy-saving devices could also be an option to improve ships' performance. Depending on supply capacity and availability of alternative fuels, fuel change could be a feasible option. For example, biodiesels or electro-LNG may be supplied to current diesel-propelled ships or LNG-propelled ships, respectively, without substantial conversion in ships' propulsion systems. Besides retrofitting to improve cargo capacity or installation of energy-saving devices such as optimally designed propellers, which result in further efficiency improvement. I'm sure some of the speakers are going to speak on this issue in further details. Instead, fuel changes, retrofitting, or installation of additional energy-saving devices could also be an option to improve the ship's performance. Depending on supply capacity and availability of alternative fuels, fuel change could be a feasible option. For example, biodiesel or electro-LNG may be applied to current diesel-propelled ships or LNG fuel ships, respectively, without substantial conversion in ships' propulsion system. Besides retrofitting to improve cargo capacity or installation of energy-saving devices, such as optimally designed propellers, will result in further efficiency improvement. By installing a simple mechanical fuel index ceiling system, limiting the maximum engine power to optimum level, the ship cannot be operated above the optimum level of power except for emergency situation, so that the operation speed optimization can be achieved from a technical approach. In summary, these are multiple options to improve upon energy efficiency of existing ships, and any of these options will be allowed under the goal-based approach as long as such options are verifiable. If a ship prefers saving capital costs, it can choose the shaft engine power limit to the optimum level. If a ship prefers high speed, it can choose technical improvement. It should be up to each ship to decide which option to take. To develop future ship propulsion within reasonable time scale, research and funding are needed in a number of areas: fuel cells, capable of sustainable powers for ship propulsion, modular nuclear reactors, hull form and skin friction reduction measures, ship operational methodologies, and perhaps high capability batteries and hydrogen generation. There is also a need for further soundly based techno-economic studies on target emission from ship. LNG is a marine fuel and has been identified by industry as the likely bridging fuel, with one of the key reasons being that in the fact that the necessary bunkering infrastructure has been developed considerably over the past few years. LNG case as a legitimate stepping stone to meet emission targets is supported by port facility investment. Even though LNG is not ideal zero emission solution, it is virtually sulfur-free and can reduce particulate in NOx emissions. Why do we need alternative ways of reducing emission? What are the alternative ways? If you look at this diagram, which is very popular now at IMO, it is available to various programs. You keep seeing this diagram, but I would like to show this here because in a nutshell, it gives you the message that GHG targets can be met without alternative fuels and energy sources that offer deep GHG emission saving compared to current fuels. So the green circles are the ways of efficiency improvement. You can see the percentage, including voice optimization, speed, extensive speed optimization, hull structure, energy management. And the yellow circles are the ways of using fuel. I mean, different types of fuel, whether it's electric, bioenergy, third fuel generation, hydrogen, and other synthetic fuels. The goal-based approach allows multiple options. The goal-based approach allowing any option to achieve energy efficiency should be fundamental basis for regulatory measures in this area. There is no one-size-fits-all measure for energy efficiency improvement in the shipping and shipbuilding sectors. Energy efficiency of existing ships can be improved through multiple ways depending on circumstances of each ship. Thus, a goal-based approach allows any options to energy efficiency improvement should be fundamental basis for regulatory measures. To reduce 70% of emissions across the fleet, this is a figure of showing about 50 to 60,000 merchant ships operating today. And as you can see, there are nearly 70, just a minute. Oh, sorry. There are 17,000 cargo ships, 12,000 bulk carriers, 8,000 crude oil tankers, 5,000 chemical tankers, more than 5,000 container ships, ro-ro passenger for more than 5,000, and LNG ships more than 2,000. This means ships, as you know, expect a life expectancy of 30 years for a ship. Means ships built today will be operating in 2030 very much, and the supply of alternative fuels and of technologies and their associated infrastructure needs to be built. So concepts of biofuel, a very brief concept. I'm sure this will be expanded in the subsequent presentation by the experts. It's crop-based fuels made up of crop and feedstock. Concerns about indirect land use usage, often called first-generation biofuels. Advanced biofuels are from biomass, energy crops, avoid direct competition with food crops and indirect land use, often called second-generation biofuels. Indirect land use, conversion of agricultural land to use for biofuel production to result in conversion of land's welfare for agriculture in a way that causes net CO2 emissions to rise. Energy crops, woody or grassy crops grown specifically for the purpose. Waste oil biofuels made from vegetable oil and such as use cooking oil and tallow. And of course, yielding crops grown have lower competition, low direct, indirect land use impacts. So one thing which is very important to consider in this case is, the concept of technology lock-in. Technology describes a situation where technology becomes a dominant incumbent solution presenting barriers to adoption. This is particularly relevant to the maritime sector in the long lifetimes of vessels. Technology lock-in can be driven by several factors. For example, changing from an incumbent technology to a new technology may involve financial barriers such as new upfront investment or sunk costs that cannot be recovered. Regulatory environments, particularly supporting infrastructure, industry practices may have developed in accordance with specifics of particular technology requiring time and investment to change or adapt to suit new solutions. Driven by uncertainty associated with new options regarding safety and reliability, strong stakeholder preference for a well-known incumbent solution may develop, hindering adoption of alternatives. If a technology that does not deliver the required reduction in GHG emission becomes locked in, this could present a risk to meeting GHG reduction targets. So how can our country contribute to ease uptake of alternative fuels? If a lot of renewables are available, potentially we can become a big fuel supplier. If a lot of ports are available for this, we can be utilized for alternative fuels. If we develop to become a major flag, this can be registered by this can be incentivized to encourage zero emission ships. If we become a major shipbuilding nation, we can sustain expanding leadership position by building alternative fuels. So energy country faces opportunity and barriers to alternative fuels. You have on one hand the energy supply chain, the industry profile, the fleet of the country, the fleet profile, technology available, and of course, more important, the finance, how it will improve the cost reduction, regulation, whether the national administration has implemented the regulation already adopted by IMO, what are the natural conditions onshore, on board, and the enablers. Next, I would like to touch on briefly on 3 incidents in my understanding, which has far-reaching consequences for merchant marine presently and for future. Let us start with the Titanic. What matters historically, all major maritime accidents have prompted IMO and other authorities adopt new regulation. This is what I want to stress on, that an incident has prompted new regulation which has had a significant effect on how much the ships are operated. Most important to start with was the sinking of the Titanic, the unsinkable Titanic, and the tragedy, and probably the biggest tragedy of 20th century. 1,500 passenger crew died in the incident, and it was considered to be the safest ship ever built at that time. Lessons learned from the Titanic: outdated standards with requirements, including not enough lifeboats. Compartments were not up to the freeboard deck, resulting in progressive flooding due to breach of hull. Lack of training, that is, safety appliances, how to interact and lowering lifeboats and getting into lifeboats, etc. Many lifeboats that were launched went away half empty. There was no emergency backup. The fire response plan was not in place. Agencies formed after this. The protocol, most important, in 2014, the first SOLAS convention happened, and as we know today, the mother of all safety convention for merchant shipping is SOLAS. And it was the sinking of the Titanic which heralded the adoption of SOLAS. The next point I would like to talk of is in 1987, the sinking of the Herald of Free Enterprise, the Ro-Ro ship. It sank just minutes after it left the Belgian port of Zeebrugge on the night of 6 March 1987. 193 passengers and crew died, and 539 of the 539 who were on board. It had the capsizing of the Enterprise led to an incident is probably considered not only a deadliest casualty involving UK registered ships since 1919, but also a wake-up call for several safety improvements in type of vessels. In addition, this capsizing became the reason for IMO to quickly adopt the International Safety Management Code, which came into force in 1998, and for the creation of the Marine Accident Investigation Board in the UK. So this heralded, as I said, the second most important or significant accident which created so many regulations, and many ships are operating even today. The next one which comes to my mind is on the top of the diagram of the slide, is the Exxon Valdez, which spilled over 11 million gallons of Alaskan crude into the waters of Prince William Sound. Many lessons were learned, but one of the most important things was the imposition of the Oil Pollution Act 1990, or the OPA, which had several remedial measures, including oil spill response plans, which came into effect, double hull on oil tankers, including higher liability limits. These are, I think, path-breaking regulations, which initially OPA 90, but are subsequently adopted by IMO. And of course, I will not name the other ships like the Aramco Cadiz, or the Prestige, or the Erika, which further strengthened IMO's hands in imposing the requirements of double hull. The third point, the fourth point I would like to stress on, is perhaps the only regulation which came into force in IMO was the International Ship Port Security Code. It was adopted by IMO, and to my knowledge, it was for reasons other than maritime accident. That is, in order to strengthen homeland security in the United States in the wake of the disastrous 9/11 bombing by terrorists of the World Trade Center in New York. And this was hastily, I dare to say it was hastily drafted, and within 2 years it was implemented. I think the quickest ever convention that was adopted by IMO. So we are still having ISPS code, as all of you know. It is for security of ships and ports. The fifth point, which comes to my mind and which is an ongoing, is the concerns raised by cybersecurity of ships and ship operation. This is a game changer, because maritime cyber risk refers to measures the extent to which a technology assets could be threatened by potential circumstances of event, which may result in shipping-related operations, safety, or security failures as a consequence of information systems being corrupted, lost, or compromised. IMO has developed cybersecurity risk management that may be incorporated in the ISM code. It incorporates the process of identifying, analyzing, assessing, communicating cyber-related risk, and accepting, avoiding, transferring, or mitigating it to an acceptable level, considering costs and benefits of action taken to stakeholders. The overall goal is to support safe and secure shipping, which is operational resilient to cyber threats. From steamships to driverless ghost ships, what are we talking about? The definition of autonomous ships. This is something which has come in and is very vigorously being pursued by IMO. MAS, or the Maritime Autonomous Surface Ship, MAS. This is these ships which a varying degree can operate independently of human interaction. As of now, IMO has identified 3 degrees: the ship with automated process and decision support, ships, seafarers are on board to operate and control shipboard system and function with a lot of automation and electronics. We already have these ships. Most of the ships are on degree 1 level. Degree 2 is remotely controlled ships with seafarers on board. The ship is controlled and operated from another location. Degree 3 is probably what IMO is right now considering, and there are already models and ships on trials operating. I have read in Japan and in Norway, which are remotely controlled ships without seafarers on board. The ship is controlled and operated for another location. There are no seafarers on board. This is to be noted. And degree 4 is autonomous ship. The operating system of the ship is able to make decision and determine action by itself, totally not having totally ship without any seafarers on board. This is something which is a truly autonomous ship operating without human monitoring and control, either on board or from shore station. It would require a level of robotics and artificial general intelligence that does not yet fully exist. Consequently, this scenario will not be included within the MSC's current scoping exercise, which is in progress. Probably the focus is on degree 3 automation remote control, where there are no seafarers on board. These ships are considered to pose, of course, a great potential risk in operation and cyber security, and therefore should not take priority in terms of development of an appropriate regulatory framework. Should take priority, not should not, should take priority. Notably, the challenges and principles discussed here would apply equally to degree 4 if and when the technology exists. Now, I would like to stop sharing. How do I do that? Yeah. In my address, if you have realized that I have touched upon key points in the past, current, and future developments in marine propulsion that is closely linked to energy efficiency and to marine and prevention of marine pollution. I'm sure that the expert knowledge, opinions, ideas expressed in at this forum by the distinguished speakers at this webinar today will give a fascinating insight into the development of ship propulsion system and operation of ships now and in the near future. It is hoped that the discussion will set out how we got to the current technological solution and examine a wide range of possibilities for future ship propulsion and operating option, keeping in mind the sustainable measures for energy efficiency in ship propulsion and prevention of marine pollution. That ends my keynote address. I hope I have been able to key in what is required for this distinguished gathering of experts to further discuss and deliberate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee. I think that was indeed a very illuminating and a very comprehensive address covering a really wide swath of history and also various aspects of marine propulsion. And I'm especially happy that you have dealt, I think, a lot with the future technologies, which is, I think, of utmost concern to us. So I think that has really set the tone for the 3 sessions to follow, which concern the present, the past, the present, and the future of marine propulsion. May I request, just one second, just give me a second, I'll just spotlight everyone. May I request Kamru Chitnis to present a memento to Mr. Chatterjee?
Like I said, I'm standing in for Captain Dixit, but it has been a great pleasure to listen to this wonderful keynote address by Mr. Chatterjee. Thank you very much, sir. And this is like Admiral Natkani said, set the tone for the day. You know, you've covered such a wide canvas and given us so many thoughts for the future. On behalf of the Indian Maritime Foundation and the National Maritime Foundation, I'm pleased to present a memento to Mr. Chatterjee as a token of our gratitude for having spared his valuable time and spent it with us and enlightening us. Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee. Do you have the memento with you? We can show it to us.
Yeah. Oh, this is a wonderful gesture. I think this is the first time I received a memento from the event 5 days in advance. Never happened in my life. And this is a fantastic idea of Natkani. And I think splendid. I mean, what to say? I mean, this is something unique and we should learn from this. I think Mr. S.M. Rai is listening. You know, we are having so many conversations. Nobody thought of this. This is a wonderful gesture from IMF and the LMF. And I thank everybody for this. It will remain in my showcase for years to come and for my memories. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee. Thank you very much.